Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vintage Booth Pro. My name is Crystal, and this is a brand new series that I'm so excited to get started. So I have a goal of being the most helpful resource on the internet for vintage booth owners. Not only this YouTube channel, but my website, vintageboothpro.com. So I have decided to start from the very beginning. What are some things that some new vendor booth owners should know before you even step into an antique mall? So today's lesson in this series is all about how do antique malls work? Because if you've only ever shopped in them, you really, even if you haven't shopped in them, you really don't know how the business side works. So I'm just laying some groundwork for future vintage booth owners, and I hope that veteran vintage booth owners will stay tuned, watch till the end, and let me know what I have missed. What have you learned? What's something that you is common knowledge now, but before you started your business, you had no idea about? And so that's what this video is all about, and I'm so excited to get started. So let's talk about your contract. So each and every antique mall is going to be completely different, but they more than likely have the same few things in common. So each booth space is going to be rented on a square footage basis, and how much each antique mall charges per square foot is completely up to that antique booth owner. So if you live in a big city with a ton of foot traffic and you get a lot of people coming in, they're going to be able to charge a lot more per square foot. If you live in the country, if you live in a rural area, it's going to be a lot less per square foot. So it's completely up to the antique mall owner on how they rent out their spaces. And if they can get away with charging more per square foot, trust me, they're going to. So just know that how big or small of a booth, it's all going to be based on the square footage per your antique mall owner. And your contract will more than likely be on a 6-month basis. And so once you get in, you have to be in that space or within the mall for 6 months. And once you pass that 6 months, it's going to be on a month-to-month basis. And so if you need to get out for whatever the reason, all you have to do is, once you pass that 6 months, tell the store owner within 30 days that you're going to need to move out, and your contract, you're fine with just letting them know within 30 days. But it's pretty much across the board. Once you start out from the very beginning, it's going to be a 6-month contract, and then it's a month-to-month lease, basically. So that square footage is your booth space, and you are completely responsible for stocking, maintaining, decorating, creating an attractive booth to get more people in to sell items. And we're going to talk about that so much more in the coming videos, but for now, we're just laying out the basics. And so the next thing that I want to talk about is still under the contract, and something you really need to know and talk to your store owner about this, but it is the percentage of each sale that the store will receive from your items. So once you start getting inventory into your booth, someone purchases one of your items, most stores will take at least 10% commission from that sale. That's really important to know up front, how much of a commission they will be taking from your booth. So not only will you have the monthly rent, you will also have a commission fee that is required from each sale. And when someone purchases one of your items and they use a credit card, it's going to be important to know who is responsible for that processing fee. Because as you know, using a credit card is not free. It's a very small percentage, but sometimes a store will pass it on to the customer that's actually buying. But most of the time, that's up to the booth owner to pay that credit card processing fee. Just have them tell you, just be sure it's clear in the contract how it's being paid and how much that credit card processing fee is. And now each and every store that you walk into will have variations in their contract. And so that could be requirements to work the front desk. I've never had that opportunity, and I do think it is an opportunity because you get to see firsthand what is being sold in your store, and kind of gives you an idea of items you need to be stocking. They might make it clear in the contract how often you need to restock your booth, how clean you need to keep your booth. But more importantly, it's going to be something you need to know is limitations on the types of items that you are able to sell within your booth. For example, some stores have a requirement that vintage only, and that, it's typically said that vintage items are 20 years old and more, but it needs to be very clear if it's of your contract, what do they think is a vintage item? Because if you have to have, 50% vintage, have them make it very clear on that since it's in your contract. There are going to be things like code enforcement, fire safety, things like that, height limitations maybe, because you think about the square footage, that goes all the way up to the ceiling, really. So how high can you actually put things without it being a fire hazard? My very first booth was right next to the emergency exit, so I had a ton of restrictions that I had to follow there. Let me know, some of you veteran booth owners that have been around, what are some unique and unusual contract variations that you've seen before? Mine was pretty cut and dry. It really comes down to the safety things that they had to follow. Oh, there are things like if you have lighting in your booth, you can't use an extension cord. It has to be a surge protector, just little things like that. And usually if it's a code that the antique mall owner is inevitably responsible for, they will make it very clear that you need to follow those rules, because they will get checks on, unexpected code enforcement checks that they need to make sure that you're following them. I've heard it said that booth owners are required to have a tax ID. I would say that most antique booth owners do not have to have that, because we run as a sole proprietorship, which really just needs your social security number. Now, if that's something you're interested in learning more about, talk to your tax professional. If you want to start a actual business, to maybe an LLC, things like that. Some people do that and they jump into it. I've always stuck with a sole proprietorship in my vintage booth business because it's easier. But if you do a tax ID, you could get tax breaks on your sales and use tax when you're purchasing things for your booth. But you can always just add it to your taxes if you're a sole proprietor anyways. So anyways, there's a lot of variations with that. Just talk to your tax professional. Don't take my word for it, because I'm absolutely not. But really, it's not that difficult when you're just a sole proprietor when it comes to your vintage booth business. The bottom line is just be very comfortable with the verbiage of your contract before you sign it. Have some time with the antique mall owner, have them walk you through it, and make sure that they point out anything that is important to them, and make sure you yourself read it thoroughly. If you feel comfortable having a professional read over it before you sign it. Mine was pretty simple. It was like a 2-page document, and it had a lot of legalese in it, but fairly easy to understand. But just know that there are variations in every contract, and just be sure that you are very comfortable with the information before you sign it. So next I want to talk about finding the perfect antique mall for your booth business. And the first thing you need to think about is, where do you shop? Is there somewhere that you'd love to have a space in? What I did when I first started is I kind of looked at a map, and I don't have a ton of free time, which I realized that you really need a lot of free time in this business. But when it comes to how far you want to travel on a weekly basis to be able to restock your booth, kind of look at a radius around your house and take a look at the options that are available. Some people will travel an hour and more to get to their booth, and that's fine. If you have time for that, that's great. I was more comfortable. Mine is about 18-20 minutes away from my house, and so that's kind of as far as I can go right now. In the future, I know there's some great, amazing antique malls within a further radius from my house. Maybe I'll get there, but I'm happy where I am for right now. And that's the thing. You have to find somewhere that you are going to be happy at. So what I did, looked at the radius, is just did some shopping at the different antique malls within my area. Some of the first few I walked in, I said immediately no. It was just, it's kind of a vibe check. Do you feel comfortable? Are you happy shopping there? One store has since shut down when I first went in. It was really difficult to find parking, to actually get into the parking lot. And then there was nobody shopping there. Like I said, it's shut down since then. Not a big surprise. Another one in my area constantly has vendor booths available. And that's kind of a red flag to me. Let me know what you think. Why can't they keep vendors? I mean, why do they keep leaving? So that's kind of what I wonder about. And it was a store I don't enjoy shopping at anyway. So that was kind of an easy one to check off the list. Now, and then it came down to two different ones. And one, kind of the location is weird. And I thought the one that I'm at right now is right off the highway, has really easy access to get into. It's close to a lot of other different shopping, and it's close to a large monthly antique show. So that helps get more traffic. The second tier one that I was talking about, a lot of other vendors in my store also have a booth there. So it's just one of those things. I just choose from two really good options, which was not a bad problem to have. One thing to think about is do some research on social media so you will know if that mall does any marketing. So do they do live sales? Do they post frequently on Facebook or Instagram? Whatever the case may be. What are they doing to get more people into the store? Do they have billboards? Do people know about the store? That's a huge key factor in your success as a future vintage booth owner. So just do a little bit of research there, and you'll likely be happy with the results if you choose one that does a lot of outreach for potential customers. So how much money is required to start an antique booth business? Well, when you are signing your contract, that's one thing that I should have mentioned before. You'll likely need to pay upfront the first month and the last month's rent for your booth at that current rate. Because I'm just thinking the contract I signed was like way less, my first and last month's rent, than I'm paying now. Anyways, you might have a security deposit. I haven't heard a ton of that in amongst other vintage booth owners, but there's the possibility that that's an option. Just be sure that you're aware when you do sign a contract, when you figure out where you want to have your booth. Now I want to talk about the concept of making rent. And this is something, once you sign that contract, you will never stop thinking about. So you have already paid for your first and last month's rent. And so that's helping you through the first month. But that first month that you have inventory in your booth, all those sales are going to the next month's rent. And so you are constantly working on making rent for the next month. And I have been incredibly lucky that I have never had to pay rent. I've never not made enough sales to make rent, I should say. The goal really should be to make rent for the next month, at least by the 15th of that month. And that doesn't always happen for me, as you know, if you follow the channel, but it's a good guideline. If you haven't made rent by the 15th of the month, it's time to start doing some sales, doing some markdowns, maybe take a step back and look at your inventory, but we're going to talk about all that soon. So just know that concept of making rent. And as a vintage booth owner, you will always be thinking about that. So once you learn it, you'll never forget it. Sometimes if you're doing research on an antique mall, you might have to submit pictures of a booth before they will consider you. And I had to do that because something that was not actually mentioned in the contract, it was that clothing was not allowed. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, was sell vintage clothing, because I had an eBay store for about a year and I was just looking to move into an in-person space. So they asked to submit pictures, and a lot of malls do want to see what kind of inventory you have. So all I did, I mapped out a space in my house and set up some clothing and set up some furniture and just kind of created my own little booth. And unfortunately the clothing was rejected, which is totally fine. I was kind of bummed. I was actually really bummed about it then, since I'd already signed my contract. But it's worked out. And now the mall that I'm in, it has new owners, and they are so there are some really cool vintage clothing booths available. But now I've moved on from that, so now it's just home decor and vintage items. Anyways, so sometimes you'll have to do that, and that's a common practice. Use space in your home, use space in your garage, borrow from neighbors, whatever you can to kind of create a booth atmosphere, and just let them, let the mall owner know fully that you don't have a current booth. So this is what you kind of have in mind, and they should be okay with the work that you put into putting that concept together. I should mention there's a possibility that the perfect antique mall for you has a waiting list, and that is incredibly common. That a good, desirable store will have a waiting list. And I also want to tell you another hack that I've learned really recently, is that if you find the perfect store and there's space available, but it's not like what you pictured, it might be in the back of the store, it might be smaller than what you wanted, consider go ahead and taking it, because when a desirable location becomes available, most antique mall owners will offer that to current booth vendors, booth owners first that are in their store before they open it up to the waiting list. So if you're on the waiting list and something becomes available and it's not quite it, maybe go ahead and do it, because people are always moving constantly. I try to avoid the first day of the month in my store at all costs, because it is insane. People moving in, moving out, moving across the store, retiring. It's constant, like a checkerboard. They're constantly moving. So it's very possible, if you have a very active store with a waiting list, that you'll be able to move to a better location. And, in a few months, you might even want to move again. It's just a constant thing. We're always moving. So now that you've got a space within the antique mall, you are going to have a booth code. And that is like a 3 to maybe 6-digit code. So when someone wants to purchase something from your booth, they bring it to the front desk, and the front desk will know to attribute that to your account by this 5-digit code. And so you want to pick something that's memorable, that's fun, and maybe even tie it into your brand name. And that's something we're going to talk about in just a minute. But I knew when I went into my store that I wanted my store name to be the Nichols Dime Store. So my last name is Nichols, and it's always been kind of a funny play on words, nickels and dimes, and a dime is like a perfect 10. So I just kind of played all that together into the store name. And one of the front desk workers was like, "Oh, your code could be dimes, because that's 5 letters and it's perfect." So for 2 years, that's been it. And it's really easy to remember. And so pick something that's fun and memorable, and definitely have a brand name. And the reason you want to do that, and the reason I do that, is because I'm in a huge mall. There are, I think it's 180 other booths. So it's so easy to get lost in the mix. And you really want to do anything and everything you can to stand out. And like I mentioned before, people are always moving. So if you find someone that likes your booth and wants to buy from you, they want to remember your booth by your brand name. And so if you move across the store, they'll be able to find you easily. And once you do come up with that name for your store, you can create a logo, which I can show you how to do. You can create business cards. You can create flyers with a QR code that takes you to social media accounts, whatever the case may be. But just really consider coming up with a fun brand name, and it can really be anything. I have a silly brand name, like I said, Nichols Dime Store. It's just a play on my name. Anything that's in the back of your mind is probably going to be good enough. So just stick with it and create a brand name for your booth. So you are a good booth owner, and you know that you want to market your booth to let the world know to come and shop in your booth. I would like to caution you to, yes, do social media, but only do one account. A lot of people, once they pick that brand name, they're going to do Facebook. They're going to start an Instagram account. They're going to create a TikTok. They're going to, a Snapchat, like whatever other social media networks there are. They'll choose one of everything. I highly recommend choosing one because having a vintage booth business is a lot of work. It's probably a lot more work than you think it is because you're constantly sourcing, you're constantly pricing, your house is going to be taken over by stuff, and you're going to be in your booth at least once a week restocking. And if you're crafting or painting, that will take over your life too. And so posting on your social media accounts is going to take a back burner. It just does, unless you were just really, really good at it. So that's why I recommend starting with one. I recommend Facebook because it just has the most traffic right now. I can share some stats that show, like, you know, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, a lot of these are coming up to replace Facebook, but right now, you know, you're on Facebook, everybody's on Facebook. They do make it really easy once you start a business page to start doing some advertising. And I can walk you through all of that. Let me know what you're interested in learning. And I've a little bit about me. I've been in digital marketing for 23 years. Corporate life just isn't for me, but I have all those skills that I can bring into the vintage booth business and help you as much as possible, because this channel exists to help you increase your sales. And the more sales we get, the more people are going to come shopping in antique malls. And okay, so now all of that stuff, the contract to sign, you have your brand name, you have your Facebook page, or whatever the case may be. Now we are going to start bringing inventory in. But before you do that, do you know what you are going to sell? Do you have a niche in mind? Do you know what sells in your area? Because let's go back to the basics of economics, supply and demand. You have to be able to put out there what people are buying, because if people aren't buying it, then your sales are going to be terrible. And that's just the way it is. I have worked with so many booth owners that just don't understand why their stuff isn't selling. It's stuff they like, so why aren't more people buying it? It's really important to know your market, what is trending in your area, what types of people. Is it a very young area that have a lot of millennials and Gen Z that are coming into antique markets, because that's a huge customer base now? Or is it people that love crafts? Is it, I don't know. It's a really tough thing to learn, but we are going to get into all of that in the next video, and we are going to create buyer personas that will help you determine what sort of inventory to bring into your booth. And so, like I said, I've been in digital marketing. I've been in the corporate world for over 20 years, and creating buyer personas is kind of, I always hated it, but it's something every global company does. Every company that is creating a marketing strategy wants to target the perfect person. And that is what you want to do in your vintage booth business. You want to target the perfect person, purchase inventory for that person, and market to them so that perfect person will come into your booth and buy your stuff. So that's going to be our next video, all about buyer personas. So be sure you're subscribed and stay tuned for that one.